I'm joined today by John Loftus, who's a former Christian apologist who defected and is now an atheist counter-apologist. He's written a number of books that argue against the Christian faith. Your history is really incredible. Your bachelor's degree is from Great Lakes Christian College. You have a master's of divinity. You have a master's of theology degree from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You were an ordained minister. Yet you found your way out of Christianity. Let's start sort of at the beginning. Before pursuing religion academically, did you have a religious upbringing as a child?
I did. I was raised in a Catholic church, and we didn't, we didn't really practice it. We went to church and we got confirmed, and went to catechism classes. I couldn't say that, our family was very devout, but there was a period of time at the late '60s, early '70s when you had the hippie movement, which for some of us morphed into the Jesus movement, where you could, be cool and listen to cool music and wear bell bottoms and wear long hair and just you had sound bites like "Get high on Jesus" and "Down with the establishment." Yeah, down with the establishment, up with Jesus. So yeah, I was in that movement. It's interesting that you get caught up with that. You don't realize that you're in a trend. You're in a particular movement that's going nationwide. You don't understand why you've adopted those sorts of things, but I did. Yeah.
And when you were going through your various academic programs that were religiously oriented, during that time, did you have doubts about the path you were on and about your Christian beliefs, or at that time did you really feel like you were a literal believer and fully committed?
Literal and fully committed. I had become, I was a hippie before I became a Jesus movement follower. I was, drugs, sex, and rock and roll. See, so I had believed that, Jesus saved me from that, and so I was very grateful and thankful, that my life had changed, and so no, I didn't have any doubts. I started reading primarily Christian literature, and that's really interesting. Josh McDowell and C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer, and with every book I read, my faith was confirmed even more. I didn't even think about reading the opposing side. Like, when you go car shopping, you tend to want to look at consumer reports, and you don't want to necessarily listen just to the used car salesman. You see, you actually have to investigate buying a car, but you don't investigate buying your religion. I didn't think about that at all. I just wanted to confirm it. It's really odd phenomenon. Saint Anselm said, faith seeks understanding, and I had my faith, and then I was out to understand it. It never was reversed. Understanding seeks faith. You see.
And when did doubt first start to sort of creep in?
Well, I was in a PhD program in theology and ethics, and I, studied with the liberals at Marquette University. So I had heard their arguments and, read some of their literature. And, I also read some of the atheist literature as well. And we studied them. And, just it wasn't just too long before those doubts started to creep into my life. I mean, life has a way of crashing down on you. You expect, life's going to be a paradise, on earth when you're with Jesus. And it didn't happen that way. Church experiences, my own experiences just didn't confirm that, the unanswered prayer, crises. And what it did is it forced me to do what I should have been doing all along. And that is critically examining my faith as an outsider would. And so when that happened somewhere around 1990, 1991, too, I began doing what I should have been doing along. And I had some information in my background because I had studied it in some depth. And I went on a new reading program, and that is to be more honest with my faith.
And do you remember any particular, so for as an example, I've spoken to people who say, what really led me down the path of questioning my faith was I used to believe the earth was 6,000 years old, And once I read about how that is not supported by any science, that opened the floodgates, so to speak, to questioning everything. Was there a particular instance or issue or question that opened the door for you?
Well, it was the issue of science. I had a cousin named Larry Strasser, and he was a lieutenant colonel in the military in the Navy at the time, and I sent him a book on evolution, and he sent me a box of books with a 32-page letter trying to explain to me that evolution is fact, and that the universe is old and all that stuff. And I hadn't really seriously considered the question before. But what I took away from it wasn't necessarily the fact that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, which I came to that conclusion. But more than that, that I could trust science. The most important thing that came from that, right about 1990, was that I could trust science over my ancient, superstitious, goat herder, Bronze Age writings who knew nothing about science. And that opened the floodgates for me. I started thinking like a scientist. I adopted David Hume's principle that we should proportion our belief, to the evidence. And with that mindset, with that attitude, a scientific mind, that I just it wasn't long when you start looking at those stories and you start applying all the knowledge I knew from Old Testament studies and New Testament studies, and to the critical assessment of that religion, the one I had been adopted, before I just abandoned it. The last two things that I abandoned were the resurrection of Jesus and the existence of God. They were really drilled into me. So I went through stages, like went from conservative believer to moderate to a liberal to a deist. And then I embraced existentialism, just faithism, if you will, and then I became an agnostic, and then finally, an atheist.
When you were an ordained Christian minister, were there times that you recall where, based on your beliefs at the time, you convinced others who came to you about things that you no longer believe now? And if so, how does that sort of feel when you think back to it today?
Well, I did. There are several people in the ministry today because of me, and they will attribute their ministry to me even now.
Hmm.
They don't like it. And several people, yeah, yeah, yeah. And several people I baptized, and they want to know, do we need rebaptized? I don't know. I don't care. How does it make me feel? I mean, it's just life. I mean, I hope they're not angry with me when they decide that it's a delusion, but they seem to be happy enough, and I certainly am. It's better over here.
Why do you think that there are some who have focused on you specifically as someone to be sort of debunked in your coming to lack of belief? I mean, there's at least one blog which seems to just exist to debunk stuff that you say. I mean, why you? How did you get on the radar of people as someone to be debunked?
Well, that's because my site is called Debunking Christianity. And that's probably some of it. I've written and edited about 8 books so far. By the end of this year, I will have published 10. And I studied under William Lane Craig at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and I suppose people don't like it, when someone who is a student of one of their fair-haired boys who disagrees and does so much to dismantle, what he's trying to do. I tend to think that I've got some pretty good arguments. I blog most every day, and Christians actually help me. They come on and they offer a counter proposal or a counter argument to something that I've written, and so from that I'm able to express myself better. I don't nothing that they have ever said has been anything important that would that I haven't considered before.
Right.
But what they do, yeah, right. But what they do is they help me express myself better. Yeah. So
You talked about William Lane Craig, who is certainly one of the most well-known, at least in the U.S., Christian apologists. I'd be curious to hear from you as a former Christian apologist. Many people we speak to say, it's really difficult to have any kind of to make any kind of progress if you are a non-believer and you're sort of debating or arguing a Christian apologist, particularly one who's sort of as articulate as William Lane Craig is. Having been on both sides of these debates and arguments, what do you find to be, from a practical standpoint, the most effective tactic or angle to take when debating or speaking with a Christian apologist?
Well, I don't think Christian apologists of any higher educational standing, with PhDs, can be reached.
Mm.
Maybe they can, but the odds are extremely low. So I don't actually try to change their minds in some sense. What I use them for is fodder, because it's obvious they're not the target of my criticisms, even though I write about them. It's those who read what I'm writing, because only they are, from my experience anyway, those are the people that can be reached. And now the best argument I found in my online debating to reach them is the outsider test for faith. I've written a book about it, and the subtitle is How to Know Which Religion is True. And I wish my publisher had gone with my proposal for the subtitle ending that should go like this: how to know which religion is true if there is one. The last phrase was left out, because I don't think there is one. And I think the outsider test shows that, even though it's not necessarily meant to show that. It's meant to tell people how to test their religious faiths, since what they learn them on their mama's knee. And that is once
so
they grow
by
up.
the outsider test, I don't know if you were, just for people who don't know, I'm guessing you mean if you didn't happen to be born into the religion that you follow, would you have chosen to convert to it because you would have found it to be the true faith? Sort of, that's the idea.
Right. And they've been slammed from all sides on this, and I've considered their arguments, and that, of course, my final statement is in my book on the topic. I would find it very odd that there would be a God who would create a religion, or would infuse it with only so much evidence that it could not convince a non-believer, that it could not convince an outsider. I mean, just think about that. Because what they do when they criticize the outsider test for faith is they have to admit that their God did not create their religion such that it could convince outsiders.
Right.
I mean, it either can or it can't. So they're caught in a dilemma on that one. Because if the evidence can't convince outsiders, then that makes God out to be less than omniscient, wouldn't you think? I say it kind of politely there. So yeah, that's one of the most effective things that I've come across. James Lindsay has said it's a silver bullet type of argument, and Richard Carrier has said some pretty high things about it. It's not that I've originated it. Everybody who's ever left their faith has probably done so, as an outsider, has begun to look at their faith as an outsider. It's that I probably defended it more than I have defended it better and more than anyone else, and so. If you are having trouble defending the outsider test for faith with believers who argue against it, then those arguments can be found in my book, pretty much.
No doubt about it. We've been speaking with John Loftus. He is currently debunking Christianity, but a former Christian apologist. John, fascinating story. Thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Well, thanks for having me.